You know, we spend, as the church, most of our time talking about sex negatively. That's just a fact. Most of the time it comes up, it's about immoral behavior. It's about avoiding immorality. And most of what we say about sex is telling people to avoid it. And it's true that we should flee sexual immorality. That's what chapter 6 says, and that is a wonderful principle, a necessary principle in our lives. Sexual immorality we should flee from and recognize that sexual immorality dishonors the Lord and defiles our bodies. But we have to understand that is only one part of the scriptural story about sex. The Bible has wonderful things to say about the goodness of sex within marriage. But because of the overwhelming emphasis of the church on the dangers of sexual sin, we can have the wrong idea that all sexual relations are inherently sinful. Now, we should try to avoid this, or that this should create some degree of shame, or that desiring the spouse is somehow lustful or dirty or inappropriate. Church history has not helped. Chrysostom wrote this in the early church: Paul permits marriage as a concession, but the very fact that it is designed to avoid fornication shows that he's really trying to encourage virginity. Okay? If you can't help yourself, fine, get married. But even in your marriage, understand this: it's better not to have sex than to have sex. That was Chrysostom's view. And so even if you're married, abstaining is better, because sex is inherently lustful. Augustine wrote this: it is not arduous and difficult for faithful married people to do for a few days what holy widows have undertaken and what holy virgins do throughout their lives. So let devotion be kindled and self-gratification be checked. Here's Augustine coming along to married people and say, you don't need to do it every day. You can take a few days off. Look at me, I'm not married. Other unmarried people, widows, we go every day without having sexual relations. Surely you married people don't have to enjoy it so much. And then he says, let their self-gratification be checked. In other words, to Augustine, sex with your spouse was just self-gratification. Just indulging your selfish sexual desires. So restrain your urges, even within marriage. Jerome wrote this. He translated the Bible into Latin. The man who acts too passionately toward his wife is an adulterer. Sex is okay, just not too passionate. Keep your sexual desires for your spouse in check. That was Jerome's advice, because you could have adultery with the person you're married with if you really are passionately attracted to them. The Reformation didn't fix the problem. The Protestants and Catholics continued to teach what the early church taught about this. Cardinal Cajetan from the Roman Catholic Church wrote this: Paul is speaking here of man in relation to the spiritual life, in which it is not good for a man to get married, for marriage is a hindrance to the spiritual life. If you want to be spiritual, you have to abstain from sexual relations, even within marriage. English Catholic priest John Colet wrote, we shall indulge ourselves with our spouse as little as possible. In this way, marriage will be for us a remedy for involuntary lust, not a resort for sexual delight for its own sake. Those people who use marriage to fulfill their mutual lust are using marriage to indulge in prostitution. You think, well, maybe John Calvin was better. No, he wasn't. Here's what Calvin wrote about sex and marriage. In sexual intercourse, there is a lack of discipline that is corrupt. This affection is exceptionally uncontrollable and almost bestial. The uncontrollable passion with which people burn is a fault arising from the corruption of human nature, but for believers, marriage is like a veil that covers this corruption so that it no longer appears before God. So if you're a believer and you're married and you desire to have sex with your spouse, you are basically giving in to bestial, dirty, sinful desires that because you're married, God says, I won't count it as sinful here. He kind of throws a veil over it so it doesn't look sinful, but it is. Really, it's a problem. It's dirty. It's corrupt. Especially if you're just doing it because you enjoy it. I mean, if you do it for children, that's one thing. But if you have sex because you like your spouse, you love interacting with your spouse in that way and you enjoy that intimacy, oh, that's just like a beast. You might as well go live out in the field with Nebuchadnezzar. It's tragic. Sometimes Christian husbands and wives feel guilty because they have sexual desires. Sometimes one spouse will almost feel embarrassed to ask the other spouse to fulfill those desires. And why does that happen? It happens because of bad theology, and it happens because the church has over and over again for almost 2,000 years now said, even within marriage, sex is still kind of embarrassing, kind of dirty, inappropriate. It's not a desire that we should be proud of.